going to move on to constructing our lining. We're going to do our pleated pocket. And I have my 2 pleated pocket panels, and I've got a directional fabric. The poppies are going from the bottom to the top, so I need to make sure that I put them the right side up, otherwise the lining will be the wrong way up. The inside of my pocket will be the wrong way up. So I'm just going to pop them together, right sides together, and match all the sides up, all the corners. And I'm just going to pop a few clips in. I don't put lots in for this. And I'm going to stitch around the outside using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, leaving a gap to turn through on that long side. Now what I will say is, what I like to do, let's just check my stitch length, is a couple of stitches to secure my threads, and then I'm going to turn my panel and stitch out towards the edge of the panel. So what I end up with is a sort of a 90-degree angle at the end of my stitching. I'll show you once I've stitched all the way around so you can actually see that. And back along the bottom here, I'm leaving a gap of, let me just measure, that's about 4.5, 5 inches or thereabouts. And when I get to the end, I'm just going to turn it around, and again I'm going to stitch towards the outside edge of my pocket, and then just back stitch to secure my threads. Now let's just remove my thread ends. I'm not sure if you can see it because I've got a grey coloured interfacing on here, but I've stitched from the side here up into the 1/4 inch mark and then gone all the way around, and then done the same thing on this side. It's difficult to actually see against this interfacing. So we're going to trim off the corners at 90 degrees, sorry, 45 degrees. There you go. It's been a long time since I was at school. 90 degrees could be any angle, but we're trimming off the corners as you would normally do. This isn't anything exciting or unusual. We're just taking that off to reduce the bulk. Then we're going to turn this right sides out. Just grabbing my pressing mat. And I'm just going to pop out those corners and the seams. Don't push your corners out too far because you'll end up with a slightly curved, you end up with it not being at 90 degrees. If you poke it and poke it and poke it, you end up with the sides of your bag, your pocket will end up slightly curved between these sort of 2 points, and you need it to be straight. It's supposed to be a rectangle. So poking out is something that you need to put a bit of force into it, but you do need to be very careful you don't push the whole thing out of shape. And I like to use a pokey tool that I can then run along the seams. Now let's just grab my pressing mat. Turn my little iron on. I'm just going to roll the top seam of this pocket between my fingers to make sure that the seam is actually right on the top there and not tucked behind. That will help to give us a nice square or rectangle, should I say, pocket. So having done that, I'm just going to press that top edge. I'm going to do exactly the same on the sides there, just to make sure it's exactly as it should be, that the seam is on the side and not curved. And the same on this end. Let's just give the whole thing a bit of a go over. And then we're going to do the same on, oh, I turned it off with my finger. So where we did those little extra stitches at the bottom of our pocket, if we just give that a little pull, you'll find that those edges where your turning gap is will very easily just turn inwards, because they're encouraged to do so by that extra couple of stitches that you did. So make sure that that bottom edge is sitting nicely and give that a good press too. What you should end up with is a nice clean rectangle, which has got nice clean sharp corners. So what we're going to do first is we're going to top stitch along the top edge, which is the edge without the turning hole. So, and I like to do 2 lines of top stitching because I'm a masochist. So my first line of top stitching will be a 1/4 of an inch. Just move the iron before it flies off the back of my table. Appears to have pulled out. And then I'm going to do a second line of top stitching at 1/8 of an inch, just because I like to see top stitching, double line of top stitching. It's not mandatory, you don't have to, it's just personal preference. Remove the thread ends. I think you can see that looks really smart with two lines along the top there. So now we're going to do some marking up. So we're going to start by finding our chalk marker. And my first line is going to be 1/2 an inch from one short end. And I'm marking this on the front of my pocket. The second line will be 1/2 an inch in again, so 1 inch from the short end. At the other end of my pocket, again 1/2 an inch from the edge. The wheel on my chalk wheel is not turning very well. I think I need to give it a bit of a, I don't know how you can make it. I think I might need a new one. I think that's what it comes down to. So the second line, sorry, the fourth line is again 1 inch from this short end. It's not terribly convincing, but there you go, that'll do. And then I'm going to fold this panel in half, short ends together, to find the centre. I'm just going to finger press it. I'm going to open up and I'm going to mark that central line. And again, to the right of that line, I'm going to do a mark at 1/2 inch and then another mark at 1 inch. And then to the left of that central line, the same thing again. 1/2 inch. And 1 inch. Now we're going to start by folding. Now there's two methods of doing this, and you can do it either way, but folding this first short end at that 1/2 inch mark to the front so that it touches that 1 inch mark. Give it a press. And pressing while you're doing this is really important. You won't get a decent pocket if you don't press really nicely. So I've pressed it, you can see that's folded over, and then I'm going to top stitch down that fold using 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now the one thing I will say here is make sure that you've got the same colour thread in your bobbin as you have in your top of your machine, because although this particular line of stitching isn't particularly visible, the stitching on this pocket will be visible, so you want the same colour on the top and bottom. So there we have, I've folded that over and I've just stitched that fold in place. We're going to do the exact same thing at the other end of the pocket with that 1/2 inch fold. So we're folding at that 1/2 inch fold to the 1 inch fold, to the 1 inch mark rather. Folding at the 1/2 inch mark to the 1 inch mark, then pressing that fold in place. And to be honest, I think the key to a pleated pocket is always plenty of pressing. If you've got a tailor's clapper, use one of those to press the folds in. If you're using a thicker fabric, that works really well. It depends how hot your iron is. Again, I'm going to stitch this fold in place using 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Fluff there that I don't need, and let's get rid of my thread ends. So now you have one long pocket with a fold on each end. So what we're going to do is we're then going to take that end that we've already got the fold on, and we're going to pull that fold, and at that 1 inch mark we're going to fold backwards. So what you're going to end up with is like a fan effect. So we're going to fold towards the back at the 1 inch mark, and oh, thank you, and we're going to press that fold in place. You can see how when I said things are quite repetitive, this is the same. So just And I'm going to do exactly the same at the other end. So with the fold that I already made facing upwards, I'm just going to fold at that 1 inch mark and put that whole bit behind. And I'm just going to press. You can do them one at a time. I'm quite confident to do them either end and then top stitch both of them. Once I've done that, I find going backwards and forwards, I sometimes forget to top stitch some of the pleats, and that just is a disaster once you've actually put your pocket in. And yes, this is a little cricket press. Now, once you've done that, you can lift up that pleat that you've already sewn in and stitch down the next fold that you've created. Again, 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. The secret of this is to keep the other fabric, the rest of the fabric, or any folds you've already made, out of the way. Okay, I have clearly run out of bobbin thread here. No, I haven't. I just hadn't pulled it up. So let's try that one again. This happens to everybody. So let's just try that again, shall we? See, this is real sewing. The same things happen to me as happen to everybody else when they're sewing. Things don't always go the way I plan them. And yes, I have been known to sew half the bag without any bobbin threading, and then without even realising, and you feel such a fool, but it does happen. I've even done it on video once or twice. So now you can see we have this lovely pleated, lovely sort of sewn in fold at one end, and I'm going to sew in the one at the other end as well. So that was the second fold that I made. One thing, I know some of my testers have used waterproof canvas for their linings, and their pleated pockets look great, but they don't sit really flat because waterproof canvas is thicker and it tries to resist the folds. So do be aware that if you're going to use waterproof canvas, you won't get quite such a nice sharp look on your pleated pocket. So now we have the pleats at both ends. We need to do these ones in the middle. Now I'm going to start at one end and then I'm going to do the other end. So I'm going to take the outer line and I'm going to fold it towards me and take that fold over to the central line. And I'm going to press it. And we're actually creating 2 folds at this point. So we've got the one on the front here on the top, and then we'll have one underneath. So press that fold in place. And again, you can stitch one, you can stitch them now if you want to, and then do the other side, or you can do like me and do both at the same time. So I'm going to take the outer line on the other side and fold it up towards me. So I'm pinching that and bringing it to that central line. And what you should end up with are 2 folds that pretty much touch each other. Now, if you're really lucky, depending on what fabric you've got, you can actually pattern match them. It depends how big the pattern is. I have only ever once managed to do that. And everybody, I was so impressed with myself that I took lots of pictures and posted it all over in all the bag groups, and people said, oh God, that's how clever is that? How did you do it? Well, actually complete fluke. No skill involved at all. So there we go. Now if I turn this over, you can see we've got the 2 folds at the back. So I'm just going to give those a bit of a press too, because obviously I'm pressing through 4 layers of fabric, so it's not going to be pressed as well as it should be, because I want these to be really nice and sharp. I love a pleated pocket, but it's got to look sharp. So now we're going to sew in all of these folds. So I'm going to start at the back. Make sure I'm pushing everything else out of the way so that I'm not sewing through any of the rest of the pocket, and I'm just sewing through that fold. Again, 1/8 of an inch. And the other one on the back, again pushing everything out of the way. A couple of back stitches to start and finish, just to secure my stitching. Get rid of any threads. And 2 trains of thought here. People say, oh, why don't you leave it till the end to get rid of all your spare threads? Because I miss them if I leave it to the end. So that's the pleats, the folds on the back stitched in. Now I'm going to fold the stitch the ones on the front. So I tend to cut my thread ends off as I go. That way I know I've done it. And the second pleat on the front, the second fold on the front even. And our pleated pocket is pretty much done. Now I'm going to give that a final press because I want everything to sit nicely. And this may seem like overkill with the pressing, but it really isn't, I promise you. If you want sharp, sharp, sharp looking pleated pockets, then you really do need to press well. Right, let's take one of my exterior panels. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it in half, short end to short end. Sorry, these are lining panels, apologies, not exterior ones. And I'm just going to, where's my scissors? I'm going to mark the centre at the bottom. And you can see I have now have a nice central mark, and I'm going to make a mark that is 1 inch from the bottom edge, except for I'm not actually going to make too much of a mark. I just want to, just enough to be able to line up my pocket. I'm going to take my pocket and I'm going to lay it so that the top stitched edge is towards the top of my lining, and I'm going to put it centrally on that 1 inch mark that I made. You can see that it's central because this join where the 2 pieces of my 2 pocket pieces sits is on that fold. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to remove the ironing board from underneath it, otherwise I'll end up stitching the whole thing to the ironing board. Is if you want to put a pin in it, if you want to put a pin either side, then please do. I rarely put pins in just because I think, well, because I think I've done this enough times that I don't actually need it. Sometimes I probably should do them. Yes. So I'm going to take it to the machine and I'm going to open up that pleat in the middle, that central pleat, and you should still be able to see your mark that you made, the central mark. So there's a chalk line in the middle, and I'm going to actually stitch down that chalk line from the top to the bottom. So this is what divides our pockets into two pockets. I'm stitching down the central chalk mark that I made. Back stitches at the end and the start to secure my stitching, removing the thread ends. I'm just going to push that pleat back down again. Now that I've secured it down, I'm just going to give it a press to make sure it's sitting nicely. Now it's sitting on my 1-inch square. Now, without pulling the pocket, and this is the essential bit, is you must not pull the pocket out of kilter. Now, if you're worried about being able to pull it, just not being able to do it without pulling, just pop a pin through just to hold it in place. I'm going to pop my finger on that bottom piece, and I'm just going to lift the top pleat out of the way. So I've actually moved that top part of the fabric. I'm going to make sure that that corner is sitting on that 1-inch square, and I am going to stitch down the very edge of my pocket, making sure that I'm not stitching down anything else. I don't want to stitch the pleat that's on top of it. I just want to stitch the edge, the very side of my pocket. So you must make sure that you don't pull it out, because this is a bit like a sort of concertina now, so it's very easy to pull it out without thinking. And if you do, then it will never sit flat. You can see there that that's sticking up, and I've stitched down here. So I've stitched down the side, and you can see we've got that lovely pleat there. Now, having done that, I'm going to take that pin out, and I'm just going to put my iron just to push it down again after I've lifted it up. As soon as you start lifting things up, your folds tend to kind of pull out a little bit. So I'm just doing that, and I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side. So I'm popping a pin in to stop it from twisting around. I'm going to turn it up the other way so that I've got the bulk of the fabric over here. I'm going to pop my finger on that bottom part, so right on the side of the bag, of the pocket, just to make sure that I'm not pulling anything out. I'm going to move that pleat that's above it, hold it out of the way, and stitch down the side of the pocket. Again, an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now, I know pockets with only 1/2 inch folds are quite tricky to do, because you have only got 1/2 inch to play with, and if you've got a machine with really wide feet, that can be quite troublesome to actually stitch on them. My best option for that is actually to use a zipper foot to do that stitching. So now we've created our pockets, but we need to close that bottom bit. So I'm going to stitch along the bottom of this pocket from one side to the other, making sure that those pleats stay exactly where they are now, so they don't pull up. Sometimes you find that the foot will catch on this one as you go across it, so you do need to be very careful. Use an awl or something to hold it down if you're not sure. And again, I'm going to stitch along the bottom here using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. If you've used a thicker fabric for this, you may need to use a hump jumper to get across the layers when you go across the pleats, because there are a few layers. But the suggestion is to make this in cotton, so for most people it should be easily achievable. If you've used something like waterproof canvas, you may struggle, simply because the average domestic machine isn't going to like going through lots and lots of layers of that. It tends to be thicker. So just a couple of back stitches. Now that will close up that turning gap in the bottom of your pocket. Get rid of any thread ends that you've got. And there you go. You've got a beautiful pleated pocket that's, you can see it's almost flat. It's beautiful. I love the fact that it's almost flat. Let me find some, if I put a couple of, because I always carry binding in my pockets, in my bags. But you can see there that you've got plenty of room to accommodate bigger things, but the pockets sit beautifully flat when they're not full of stuff. And that is a perfect, in my opinion, is a perfect pocket. And actually, no, there's not, it's not pattern matched, but it's not bad. It doesn't look horrendous. So that's your pleated pocket.